Welcome back, everyone. I'm the Bella Gamer, and today we're talking about one of my top 5 mechs in the game, and that's going to be the Hydra. And just look at how awesome this art is for this mech. It's such a cool looking mech, and it's a size 1, which is actually crazy to me considering because it just looks so much bigger. Like, I don't know where the pilot would be. I guess inside that large, like, orb in the center. But still, the Hydra is a very interesting mech. And the best way to put it is this is the license and frame you want to utilize if you love the drone components of the game. This is the drone based mech. Honestly, if you're going with this one, you might want to take the I think it's Drone Shepherd is one of the talents for it. It's a really, really cool mech. I also absolutely love the idea behind it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the stats and what this thing can do. All right, so go ahead and looking at the base frame traits here. Its armor and HP are pretty good. Again, they're both in the average range, but most mechs either have like a little bit more HP and no armor, or a little bit less HP and one armor. So similar to the Metal Mark, which we just spoke about in the last episode, this one is very similar. It also is very similar in the fact that it has this time opposite though. Its evasion is a little bit low, and it's actually a weird number. 7 is a very strange number for evasion. Usually it's like 6 or some even number. Not that that's super relevant. And its E defense is pretty good, which is pretty standard for horse mechs. So yeah, it's definitely something that speaks to how this mech is supposed to be played, where it's a little bit tanky, it's not super evasive, but its E defense is good. So this is kind of a hub style of mech, where it's designed to kind of like sit down in a location and do its thing, which we're about to see. Its heat capacity is on the low end of average. Its sensors is average. It's got a tech attack boost though, which is pretty good. Its repair capacity is on the low end of average. It has an average save. Its speed is on the high end of average, and it has a lot of system points, higher than average system points. And that makes a lot of sense because it's going to need a ton of system points for the many drones that you're going to get. Honestly, for this particular mech, if you're looking at what kind of stats you want to dive into for it, I would say systems is probably a really good place to start, so you don't have to worry about, having enough for all the drones that you want to have, and probably some engineering and probably some hull. Hull is really good. I'll say engineering and hull are kind of even. Engineering is really good because increasing your heat capacity is always solid, but more importantly, it gives us more charges of things, and many drones in the game actually have charges. But hull is good because if this mech is, designed to kind of sit back and let the drones do all the work, it needs to defend itself before, it gets blown up. But let's go ahead and take a look at the frame traits here. So, System Link. When deployed, the Hydra's deployables and drones gain 5 HP. This is not necessarily a super good feature. I like it because the thing with most drones is most drones have about like 5 HP. So, this essentially doubles the amount of HP a drone has, making some of the more nasty drones in the game much more annoying. And this has a secret extra bonus of any kind of cover you create or any kind of objects you create actually have extra HP as well, which makes the Hydra kind of live up to its controller title here. It says Striker Controller. And this is actually not, I would say, very. The Hydra just doesn't boil down to normal things. It can do a lot of different things because there's a lot of different drones. The controller aspect is a big part because you can situate a battlefield using your drones. This can make it easier to move allies. And Striker, I guess, because there's so many combat drones, but I wouldn't even call it necessarily a Striker. I wouldn't really call it necessarily any type of mech other than just it's the Hydra. It's the drone mech, so it's whatever you utilize its drones with. And I apologize if you are getting annoyed by the little flashiness. It's a Horus thing. It's got some interesting lore. You can definitely read it down. Oh, read it down here for sure. But let's go and talk about its other trait, which is Shepherd Field. This is really, really good because drones, deployables, and objects adjacent to the Hydra gain resistance to all damage. This makes any like cover, deployable cover that the Hydra set down very, very good because they are even more sturdy with 5 HP and gaining resistance. And this also makes any kind of useful drones, like the reloading drone that you can pick up from the Barbados, for instance. Now, a drone that's a very strong target for a lot of enemies to hit because its features are really, really good. Now it's just a lot harder to kill. And that's kind of the basics of its frame traits. Now, if we take a look here at its mounts, it's got a main mount and a heavy mount. I wish it had a flex mount rather than a main mount just to give it a little bit more flexibility. These two do make sense given the license. I'm just not 100% sure. There is a core bonus that can give you, I believe, an extra main mount if you only have two mounts, which is really good on this mech for a very particular reason. But we'll get to that more when we talk about the license. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the Orochi disarticulation. So the Hydra itself is actually made up of a series of 4 drones that do different things. Now, as a passive effect, you get one of these drones that accompany you from the start of a mission. These particular drones share your evasion, e-defense, and speed, and they can move independently on your turn, but can't take any other actions. If you can fly or teleport, they too can fly or teleport, which makes it really good and makes for a lot of very interesting builds. And if an Orochi drone is within sensors, you may recall it as a quick action integrating into your mech's body where it cannot be targeted. You may redeploy it to a space within sensors as another quick action, and whenever you rest or perform a full repair, you may choose a different drone to accompany you. Additionally, your drones regain all HP and automatically are repaired if they are destroyed, which is really good. You don't have to spend any of your repairs to fix your drones. And this is the main kind of core component. And the interesting thing about the Orochi is you gain access to one of these very interesting drones that we're going to talk about here in a moment. But on full deployment, your active core bonus, you separate into all your drones and they remain active for the rest of the scene. You may recall or redeploy any number of them at a time. This pretty much, it doesn't actually separate your entire, like what's left is kind of like the core chassis of your mech, but like you can imagine parts of your mech kind of flying off and doing their own things on their turn. That's very, very cool. So let's go ahead and talk about the various drones here. So first we're going to talk about the Guardian drone. It's a very interesting drone, and I do love the fact that these drones specifically get some extra benefit from your grit. So their HP is 5 plus grit, and their evasion, I don't know why they have the basic evasion here, because it says specifically they share your evasion, but whatever. Anyway, this drone projects a shield. Range attacks against adjacent allied characters receive +1 difficulty. The Guardian drone is probably going to be your basic, like, I want to keep this with me to avoid damaging myself or to defend my allies, but this can really, be used to make your mech essentially a defender mech with an alternate part of it that goes out and defends one of your allies, essentially giving them soft cover without giving them soft cover. The snare Orochi is really good because as a reaction, you may force characters that start their turn adjacent to this drone or move adjacent to it for the first time in a round to make an agility save. On failure, they become immobilized. They only cease to become immobilized when the drone is destroyed or no longer adjacent, or they succeed on an agility save as a quick action. This is very much a control effect, and locking down an enemy is pretty good, though that does put this particular drone in danger. Now, that might not be a very serious issue, depending on if you only plan on using the one drone, since they automatically get fully repaired whenever you take a full rest, but it's something to keep in mind. And with your ability, as long as you're within sensors to recall the drone, makes it a lot safer because it can come back in once it gets a little too damaged. And it does say any characters. So technically, this can be used to snare your allies for whatever narrative purposes you have. It's one of those things that I hopefully it's not used to grief your other players, and it shouldn't be. obviously, but I do like the story implications of what the Snare Orochi drone can do. All right, so let's go ahead and hide my camera real quick for these last two here. Oh, the camera. There you go. So we have the Shredder Orochi drone. I imagine y'all can think of what this one does. As a reaction, you may force characters that start their turn adjacent to this drone or move adjacent to this drone for the first time in a round to make a whole save. On a failure, they take 1 kinetic damage and become shredded until the end of their next turn. Perfect for softening up an enemy and making them vulnerable. I will say, though, that because it requires adjacency, this is another type of drone that is very likely to get targeted if you're not careful. That being the case, if you have a high enough evasion, for instance, that's not necessarily an issue, but something to keep in mind. And as well, we have the remaining one, the Hunter Orochi drone. And as a reaction, you may force characters that start their turn adjacent to this drone or move adjacent to it for the first time in a round to make a system save. On failure, they receive lock on. This one is a very powerful effect, but I don't think it's as likely to get targeted by enemies, even though lock on is a pretty, it's a pretty good buff for your team. This is a very all of these you can see here, they don't require action. So when you look up here at the top where it says it can move independently on your turn but can't take any other actions, I don't know if that means reactions. Very interesting. That being the case, I'm assuming it's being mentioned so they can't take reactions if you do move them independently, though that does kind of heavily remove some of their effectiveness. And they follow you, I'm assuming. That being the case, I guess you can run up and use their effects. I'm not sure. It's very interesting. Now, you're definitely going to want a longer sensor range too, and I believe there's a Smith Shimano core bonus that you can pick up that allows you to increase your sensor range by 5. So that's definitely something that you are going to want to consider as well. But this is the Orochi. So this mech here has some really good drones, even though all their effects are require adjacency. I don't even know if that is necessarily intended for the Hydra to kind of run into combat because it doesn't have a lot of defenses to assist it in those situations. It's very interesting. I think what I like about this kind of mech the most is the Hydra is a big brain kind of mech. It's a mech that you can set up all kinds of really cool things and really cool features. And with the drone shepherd talent and some of the other features in this license, you can do some really, really cool things. So honestly, I like this one because its power is just not very obvious. And I think this is kind of a mech that has a very good scaling of effectiveness where the better you are with this mech, the better the mech becomes, which is really cool. But let's take a look at some of the other parts of the license to see what we can do with our drones. So first up at the rank 1 of the license, we have the Ghoul Nexus here. It's a pretty decent range, a range of 10 Nexus that has variable damage type. It can do any of the standard, I don't think it can do burn, but I think it can do kinetic. Actually, does it say in the variable? I wonder if I click this. Nope, it doesn't say. That's unfortunate. I'm pretty sure, let me double check just to be sure. Okay, so I actually took some research. I actually had a difficult time. I couldn't find it on the website. It was made clear in the book, unless this got errated, which I'm actually not sure. But to my current understanding anyway, variable weapons like this one does either kinetic, explosive, or energy damage, not burn, which is burn would be really, really strong, to be fair. But regardless, Ghoul Nexus is still really cool. I love Nexus weapons in general. They're essentially just small drones or nanites that fly out and attack enemies. And it's got really good range, and a D3 plus 2 damage is actually really strong. The fact that you can also change it up to affect certain enemies is also very solid. It's also smart, which means that it targets the enemy's E defense rather than their normal defense. This can be good in a variety of situations. A lot of very standard mechs don't have a very good E defense, though there are some types of enemies that the Ghoul Nexus is not going to be good against. I would say more often than not, though, the Ghoul Nexus is going to be very effective against a lot of enemy types, which makes the smart tag even better. It's a very good, strong, and variable weapon type, and it's very good. For a rank 1 pickup, the Ghoul Nexus is awesome. In addition to the Ghoul Nexus, we also have Puppet Master, a really good 2-point system here, and it gives you 2 quick tick actions. First, you get Guide the Flock, where you can move any number of drones within sensors, which is another reason why I said the Hydra probably should boost its sensors as much as it can, and including those belonging to other characters, which is really, really fun. Now, any of the drones that move in this way move 4 spaces in any direction. This is a good way to disrupt enemy drone setups, but the biggest part about this one is using this with like turret drones or the like to move them around so that they can be positioned better. It's really good. This is very, very powerful. And it's just a quick tech action. Like, come on, this is very, very solid. Now, Electro Pulse is another one that also sets up a very interesting kind of like almost chain reaction kind of thing. Characters of your choice within sensors adjacent to any drone are deployable, even those of their own, take 2 energy damage. Now, I believe the Drone Shepherd talent has something similar to this. Actually, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Ah, I see. Drone Commander. And yeah, so there is the. Is it. I think it's Energized Swarm, yeah. So once per round, when you make an attack that consumes lock on, your drones immediately emit a vicious pulse of energy. All characters of your choice within a burst 1 areas centered on each of your drones take a d6 energy damage. Each character can only be affected by 1 pulse from 1 drone, even if the areas overlap. There's also some other good things here, but we're not going to necessarily get into the talents. That's probably going to be for a different video. But yeah, so you can see with Puppet Master and Drone Commander kind of being combined together, you get a really good kind of setup. And I guess we'll look at Shepherd Drone here as well, because as a protocol, you can move a drone you control up to 4 spaces within its sensors. So this just makes you a flying nexus of drones using nexus weapons. It's very, very fun. All right. Next up at rank 2, we have the Ghast Nexus. So again, another a mech that uses nexus weapons predominantly, which again, there is a talent specifically for use of nexus weapons, making the Hydra a very solid just general playstyle of nexus and drone, which I really like. Now, this is a heavy mount, which, you know, with the Ghoul Nexus being a medium, a normal mount, makes this main mount. There you go, not normal mount. Makes this fill up your slots. So your mech within the license has everything you need, which honestly I think is really good. But there's also something addition to that, which we'll get into a little bit. But I really like the Gas Nexus because not only does it do a good amount of damage, a d6 plus 3 damage, which is very solid for a heavy Nexus, but this weapon is also a drone. So yeah, this weapon may be used to attack as normal or deployed as a drone, as you can see there in the equipment effect. And we can talk about the Ghast drone itself, which is really cool. Now, this is a drone that has 2 armor, so a beefy boy. And since you're deploying it as a Hydra, it's going to have 10 HP rather than 5, which makes this more tanky than some mechs. That's actually nuts. This is more tanky than some just full mech frames out the gate, which is really, really good. And it has a base evasion of 10, which is very solid, and a good E defense as well. This is a very, very durable mech, and it makes a lot of sense. This is one of your weapon mounts. This is something that you don't want to lose. Now, the drone can be deployed, there you go, in any free space in sensor range and line of sight as a free action, which is really cool. And there it becomes stationary, a stationary hovering drone. Once deployed, you may still use it for skirmish and barrage attacks as though it was still a weapon, but use line of sight from the drone traced from its location. And you can also recall and redeploy the Gas Nexus as quick actions. Until recalled or destroyed, it remains deployed until the end of the scene. If destroyed, it follows the rules for destroyed drones and can't be used until repaired. So this is really good. This is also another smart weapon as well. So it targets E defense. This is really good. Essentially, this allows you to throw your gun past cover to shoot enemies behind cover. And because you can deploy the gas drone as a free action, that's pretty nutty. This is a really good gun. It's very solid. For a heavy mount especially, this is a very, very solid weapon. And honestly, it's really cool. I absolutely love the Hydra. It's got good weapons, some good systems, and it uses drones, which I absolutely love. And it's based off of one of my favorite mythological creatures, the Hydra. So, you know, This mech was just made for me. The fact that it's not my favorite mech is insane, but it's still one of my top 5, probably even my top 3 mechs in the game. Also, here at rank 2, we get the Tempest drone, another 2-point system here. So again, investing in your systems is definitely not a bad thing. And this one is a very tanky drone as well. On top of the fact that you can deploy this one as a quick action, which is pretty standard for mechs, any character that starts their turn adjacent to the Tempest drone or moves adjacent to it for the first time in a round must succeed on a hull save or take 4 energy damage and be knocked 3 spaces directly away from the drone. You can recall and redeploy it as quick actions, and until recall or destroyed, it remains deployed until the end of the scene. This is an insane zoning tool, and it has resistance to all types of damage, making it even stronger than the Ghast nexus drone that you can create. Overall, a very, very powerful drone, and with the Puppet Master or Drone Commander, you can make this thing an absolute nightmare to an enemy. Now, the best part is it's whenever they start their turn adjacent to the drone. So you just got to move it up, and then as soon as the enemy starts their turn, bzz, they get thrown away, and it's really, really good. I like this drone a lot. This drone's a nightmare on the battlefield. And because it has resistance, and because you're a Hydra and you have higher HP, it's got 10 HP and resistance to all damage. This thing's a nightmare. This thing is going to be a big, big target. And the best part is you just, as a quick action, when it gets low on HP, you just bring it back in, and it's good to go. You don't have to worry about it for the rest of the combat. I don't know. I think this is a very, very powerful drone, and for the second rank of Hydra, very, very good. All right, and we're on to the final rank of the Hydra license here. But before we get into it, as always, if you enjoy this kind of content, leave a like so that other people get a better chance of seeing it, and as well subscribe so you can have a higher chance of seeing my videos as they come out. I do about 1 to 2 Lancer videos a week, which is pretty good, especially because at the moment I've kind of pulled back from a little bit from Pathfinder. I'm waiting for Archive and Nethys to open up to make video production just a lot easier. And as well, I talk about all things tabletop. So, if you're into tabletop games and you want to see a wide variety of different games and get some pretty in-depth information as well, this is the channel to be on. But let's go ahead and talk about the Annihilation Nexus, a really cool Nexus for the Hydra license here. But for anyone, this is a super heavy Nexus, so it does require a full barrage to utilize, but it's a good area effect. So it's a burst 2, and it does a d6 plus 3 damage, energy damage, which isn't much different than our heavy mount. So why do we expend an extra action to utilize this, other than the fact that this uses a burst 2, which, to be fair, burst 2 is a pretty big area, and it makes it very likely for you to damage multiple enemies. This has additional effects that make it even better. You can make a second attack with this weapon at the start of your next turn as a protocol. The secondary attack can't deal bonus damage and doesn't trigger any additional secondary attacks. You may center this weapon's attack on either yourself or any of your drones within sensors. And bursts can just emanate, they don't affect the thing. So that being the case, the secondary effect of this weapon is very good. Now, it is a burst, it doesn't have any range, so it does emanate from you when you first utilize it, meaning that it does want the Hydra to be up close in combat, but this is insanely good for even a tanky mech. Honestly, there's a variety of defender mechs I feel this could be really, really good on, even though it is a super heavy effect. If you're a defender mech that uses drones, which some of my builds have, this is an insanely good weapon, because then you can not only burst into area around you, since you're not afraid to get up and close to the enemy, but if you're using your drone, you can create other danger zones as well that don't require a lot of movement from your mech. Really, really good. Now, the damage from this is armor piercing, and it's also smart. So enemies that don't have a high E defense are going to be incredibly vulnerable to this, as a lot of enemies that sacrifice E defense bulk up against their normal types of damage, typically either having high evasion or, more standardly, having high armor. This just targets both of those weaknesses, making the Annihilation Nexus really good. Now, of course, because this is a super heavy nexus for the Hydra itself, you have to sacrifice pretty much both your mount slots for this. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, especially if you want to go more of the drone hub style gameplay where you use tech actions on enemies within range and maneuver your drones to do most of your attacking. This can be really good. And I think the fact that this license particularly has three, weapons in it is the reason why the Hydra technically has Striker. Even though, again, the Hydra doesn't have a lot of features that really make it a Striker. I don't know. It's very, very interesting. Regardless, this is a really cool weapon and very much fits in line with the Hydra and definitely worth the 3 rank pickup. And our last license here is the Assassin Drone, a 2-point pickup. The Assassin Drone can be deployed as a quick action, standard for mechs. But what this thing does is not only does it have a pretty good E defense and evasion that you can see here, but it gets a really good reaction. So upon deployment, it targets a blast to area of your choice within line of sight and sensors, and you gain the area denial reaction. You may recall or redeploy the assassin drone as a quick action until recall or destroyed. It remains redeployed until the end of this end of the scene. Now, I don't know. It says it targets a blast to area of your choice within line of sight and sensors. I don't know if that means it has to mean your mech, right? So honestly, you're going to want to deploy the assassin drone like adjacent to your mech, since if you're the Hydra, you give resistance to all drones who are adjacent to you. And since it has extra HP, that makes this an insanely dangerous drone to have on the battlefield. Now, the area denial is really good. So a hostile character starts movement or enters into the area targeted by the drone, you can make a range attack against them with the drone, gaining your grit as a bonus to its roll, which is very unusual for, you can see here, 3 kinetic damage. That's really good. That's very solid. And I'll make special mention as well. This is not a unique system. Unique systems, typically you can't take more than one. This one's not a unique one. That means you can technically have multiple assassin drones, which is very good. It's 2 system points a pop, sure, but that's very solid. Now, obviously, you can only use one reaction at a time. So you're only going to get to use this, once on any given enemy, typically, unless you set out a lot of very good, areas. Even then, it's probably still just going to be used once against it. But yeah, this is going to be your buddy, especially if you're playing the drone kind of hub style gameplay. This one just sits there on your side, your little buddy, your aid in combat, and they just shoot enemies, and it's really good. The assassin drone is very, very powerful. I think this is really good. It's 3 kinetic damage, sure, which is not necessarily a ton, but as a reaction, that's really good. And considering many of the other reactions we can get with some of the other aspects of drones and other features in the license, the Hydra's a very good mech. It's a very dangerous mech. It can do a large variety of different jobs. Got great zoning tools, and it works with a lot of other licenses. Honestly, if you're into big brain plays where you're manipulating the battlefield like a chessboard, the Hydra is probably going to be for you, and it's definitely why it's one of my favorite drones in the game. But that's going to be it for the video. The Hydra is a really, really cool license. It's one of my favorites. So definitely check it out on CompCon, the website you see here. Next, we're going to be talking about the Napoleon. The Napoleon is a very annoying mech. It's one of the most difficult to destroy mechs in the game. So if you want to fight as an invincible fighter in the game, the Napoleon is going to be for you. Anyway, that's going to be for me. Thank y'all so much for watching. Good luck with your games. Lead the bad luck to me. And I'll see y'all next time. Bye.